I have been on this bench for 38 years. I have seen fathers steal bread to feed their children, single mothers cry over parking tickets, and the most hardened criminals. I have heard every excuse imaginable, from begging and pleading to clumsy lies. But in nearly 4 decades of presiding over tens of thousands of cases, I had never had a defendant stand before me, point a finger in my face, and threaten to strip me of my judicial robes until Preston Sterling walked through those doors on a bleak Tuesday morning. Preston Sterling, 25 years old, the only son of the powerful Senator Robert Sterling. He did not enter my courtroom like a man facing justice. He walked in as if he was strolling across his family's private golf course. He wore a custom Italian suit that likely cost more than my monthly salary. His hair was meticulously styled, and on his wrist sat a PC Philippe watch that glistened under the courtroom's neon lights. Preston was known for his lavish parties in Washington, D.C., and for an attitude that suggested he believed the sky was the limit, convinced the Sterling name was a get-out-of-jail-free card for any legal trouble. A smirk rested on his face, his eyes sweeping the courtroom with disdain, as though his presence were a favor to us all. But seated in the front row, hands trembling as they clasped together, eyes red from crying, was someone entirely different. Mrs. Maria Rodriguez, a 60-year-old parking enforcement officer, would serve the city faithfully for 25 years. Mrs. Maria looked small in her frayed uniform, shrinking into herself. She was not merely a victim of verbal abuse. She was a victim of an attack on human dignity. The fear in her eyes made my blood boil, a simmering anger at the injustice that I had to suppress to maintain my professionalism. The charges against Preston Sterling were serious: disorderly conduct, verbal assault on a public official, obstruction of justice, and threatening a high-ranking official. According to the police report and Mrs. Maria's body cam footage, the incident occurred at 1 p.m. in front of the city's most luxurious restaurant. Preston had parked his bright yellow Lamborghini, blocking an entrance reserved for fire trucks and the handicapped. When Mrs. Maria, simply doing her job, politely asked him to move the vehicle or face a ticket, Preston refused. Instead, he threw his car keys to the ground and screamed in the face of a woman old enough to be his mother. "Do you know who my father is? Who do you think you are to write a ticket for my car? Pick up the keys and get lost before I make you unemployed." When Mrs. Maria insisted on issuing the ticket, Preston snatched the notebook from her hands and tore it to shreds, then spit on the ground beside her shoes. Police were called, and even while being handcuffed, Preston continued shouting about how his father would have every officer there fired by the next morning. Now, standing in my courtroom, Preston appeared to believe that what could not be bought with money could be solved with political power. He was mistaken. What I did over the next 20 minutes, while facing the arrogance of this golden child, became the most intense trial of my career. If you believe that no one, whether their father is a senator or the president, stands above the law, and if you believe that respect for ordinary workers, like Mrs. Maria, measures a person's character, then what I am about to say to the Sterling heir will remind you that justice still exists and bows to no one. I opened the case file, the rustle of paper echoing in the silence. I peered over my glasses, locking eyes with his swaggering posture. "Mr. Sterling," I began, my voice deep and steady, "you are charged with illegal parking, verbal assault on a public official, destruction of government property, and resisting an officer. These are serious charges. How do you plead?" His attorney, Mr. Charles Whitmore, man known for million-dollar lawsuits and deep political connections, rose and adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges. We believe this was an unfortunate misunderstanding stemming from the inflexibility and unprovoked hostility of the parking officer toward my client. Mr. Sterling was simply rushing to an important meeting." I raised my hand, cutting him off. "Counselor Whitmore, we have security footage from the restaurant and body cam video from Mrs. Maria. Do not speak to me about flexibility. When your client parked in a fire lane, Mr. Sterling, the video shows you had quite a sharp tongue. You may speak for yourself. How do you plead?" Preston sighed, rolled his eyes with exaggerated boredom, and stood, his hands buried in his pockets. "Not guilty, Mr. Caprio. Honestly, I find this whole trial ridiculous. I told that woman I was only parking for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. My father, Senator Sterling, has done a lot for this city, including approving the budget that keeps this courthouse running. And this is how you repay him, by dragging his son to court over a petty parking ticket." The courtroom went still. The insolence was unmistakable. He was not only disrespecting Mrs. Maria, he was openly disrespecting the entire judicial system. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice hardening, "remove your hands from your pockets when you address this court." And he slowly complied, though his defiant expression remained. "Fine. Listen, Judge, let's wrap this up quickly. How much is the fine?" 500. 1,000. I'll write a check right now. I have a lunch date at 12, and I don't want to be late." He pulled a checkbook and a gold pen from his suit pocket, holding them out as if he were dispensing charity to a beggar. "Sterling," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed louder than any shout, "put that checkbook away. This is a court of law, not a drive-through window. You cannot buy your way out of this courtroom, and you certainly cannot buy back the dignity you stole from Mrs. Maria." Preston froze, the pen suspended in midair. He stared at me with genuine confusion, as if the idea of money being refused was a foreign language he had never learned. Slowly, he lowered the checkbook, a sneer creeping back across his face. "Fine," he scoffed. "Have it your way. Waste the taxpayers' money on a trial. But when my father hears about this, don't say I didn't warn you." I ignored the threat and turned to the clerk. "Play the footage. Let's see exactly what this misunderstanding looks like." The courtroom lights dimmed. The large monitor flickered to life, displaying high-definition footage from Mrs. Maria's body camera, capturing every detail of that sunny afternoon. The video opened on the bright yellow hood of the Lamborghini, blocking a clearly marked by lane. Mrs. Maria's voice was calm and professional. "Sir, excuse me, you can't park here. This is an emergency access lane." On screen, Preston stepped out of the restaurant, phone pressed to his ear. He did not look at her. He waved dismissively, as if shooing away a fly. "I'll be 5 minutes. Relax. I can't allow that. Please move the vehicle, or I'll have to issue a citation." That was the moment everything changed. Preston ended the call and stormed toward the camera, his face twisted with rage. "Are you deaf?" I said. 5 minutes. "Do you have any idea who I am? My father is Senator Sterling. He runs this city." The audio was crisp. Fear could be heard in Mrs. Maria's voice as she stepped back. "Sir, please lower your voice. I'm just doing my job. Your job." Preston screamed. "Your job is whatever I say it is." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his keys, and threw them. They struck the pavement with a sharp clack at Mrs. Maria's feet. "Pick them up. Go park it yourself if you care so much. Move it." Mrs. Maria stood frozen. I can't do that, sir. Useless." Preston lunged forward, snatched the ticket book from her hands, and tore it apart. The sound of ripping paper filled the silent courtroom as he shredded it and tossed the confetti-like pieces in her face. Then came the moment that made the entire gallery gasp. Preston leaned in and spat on the ground, inches from her shoes. Pathetic. "Get out of my sight." Screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I looked at Mrs. Maria, her head bowed, a tissue pressed to her eyes as she relived the humiliation. I scanned the gallery. Faces stared at Preston with open disgust. Even his high-priced attorney kept his eyes on the desk, unable to meet my gaze. I turned back to Preston. He showed no shame. He looked bored, inspecting his fingernails. "Mr. Sterling," I said, fighting to keep the tremor of anger from my voice, "you just watched yourself abuse, threaten, and assault a civil servant who was simply enforcing the law. You threw keys at her as if she were a servant. You spat at her feet. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Preston shrugged, adjusting his silk tie. She was being aggressive, Your Honor. The video doesn't show her tone before that. She provoked me. She was disrespectful of my time. And honestly, I did her a favor. She shouldn't even be working in that heat at her age. I was making a point. A point. I leaned forward. And what point was that? That there's a hierarchy in this world. Preston replied coldly, locking eyes with me. Some people make the rules, and some people follow them. My father and I make them. People like her, frankly. People like you are just supposed to facilitate us. If you can't see that, maybe you're the one who shouldn't be in that chair. The audacity was staggering. He wasn't defending his actions. He was doubling down on them, convinced he was untouchable. Hierarchy, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. You believe that because your father is a senator, you are above the law. That wealth gives you the right to degrade another human being. It's not about wealth, Judge. Preston smirked. It's about reality. Call my father, Skim. He'll tell you to stop wasting everyone's time and dismiss this case. In fact, I'm sure he's already making calls. You might want to check your phone before you do something you'll regret. I leaned back, interlacing my fingers as a strange calm settled over me. This young man believed he held all the cards. He thought this was a game of poker, where his father's name was a royal flush. He had no idea he was seated at a chessboard dance. He had just moved his king into a trap. Mr. Sterling, I said softly, you seem very confident in your father's influence. You appear to believe this courtroom operates on favors and phone calls. Let me make something clear. In this room, there is only one hierarchy. The law sits at the top, and right now, you are at the very bottom. We'll see about that, Preston muttered. Double quotes. Oh, we certainly will, I replied. Because you mentioned your father, and you mentioned calls being made. It just so happens I did receive a call this morning regarding this case. Preston's eyes lit up. See, I told you. What did he say? Dismiss the charges. Not exactly, I said, lifting a piece of paper that had been resting on my bench since the session began. But before I address that, I want to hear from Mrs. Maria, and I want you to look at her while she speaks. I don't need to listen to her, Preston snapped. In my courtroom. You do? I slammed the gavel, the crack echoing sharply. Sit down and be quiet. Mrs. Maria, please approach the bench. Mrs. Maria walked forward slowly, clutching her handbag with both hands as if it were a shield. She avoided looking at Preston. She couldn't. The trauma of that afternoon still weighed heavily on her. Mrs. Rodriguez, I said gently, lowering my voice to the tone I reserve for children and those worn down by life. Please tell the court how this incident has affected you. Take your time. She took a deep breath, her voice shaking. Your Honor, I've worked for the city for 25 years. I raised 3 children and 2 grandchildren on this job. I've been cursed at before. People get angry about tickets. I understand that. She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. But I have never felt like trash. When he threw the keys at me, when he spat on the ground, he looked at me like I wasn't even human, like I was dirt on his shoe. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. I went home that night and scrubbed my shoes for an hour, but I still felt dirty. I felt small. My grandson asked me why I was crying, and I couldn't tell him that a man young enough to be my son treated me like. I didn't exist just because he drives a fancy car and I wear a uniform. Oh, please, Preston interrupted, throwing up his hands. Save the tears for a soap opera. You're crying because you want a payout. I know how this works. You see a sterling, you see dollar signs. Judge, can we stop this charade? How much does she want? 5, 10. I'll write her a check instead of paying the court. Just to make her stop talking. The gavel struck the wood like a gunshot. Mr. Sterling, I roared. One more word out of turn. One more insult directed at this woman. And I will hold you in contempt of court and have you removed to a holding cell immediately. Do you understand me? Preston slumped back in his chair, muttering under his breath, but he stayed silent. I turned back to Mrs. Maria. I'm sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez. Please continue. That's all, Your Honor, she whispered. I want him to know that I am a person. That's all. I am a person. Thank you, ma'am. You may sit down, okay? I waited until she was seated before returning my attention to the defendant. The air in the room was thick with tension. Preston looked bored again, glancing at his watch, seemingly untouched by the pain he had caused. Mr. Sterling, okay? I said, leaning forward. Earlier, you spoke about hierarchy. You said there are people who make rules and people who follow them. You said people like Mrs. Maria exist to facilitate you. It's the truth, Preston replied, his tone less arrogant now, tempered by caution. Look at the economy. My family creates jobs. We drive the economy. She writes tickets. It's not the same value. It's value, I repeated. Let's talk about value. Mrs. Maria has served this city for 25 years. She wakes up at 5 every morning, stands in rain, snow, and heat to keep our streets safe and orderly. She raised a family on an honest wage. She has never asked for a handout. She has dignity. I pointed at him. And then there is you. You drive a car bought with your father's money. You wear clothes paid for by your father's influence. You dine at restaurants where a single bill exceeds Mrs. Maria's weekly paycheck. Yet you have never worked a day of hard labor in your life. You believe value comes from what you own. I am telling you, value comes from what you do and how you treat people when you think no one is watching. Preston rolled his eyes. Is the lecture over? Because I'm still waiting to hear about that phone call from my father. I'm sure he cleared all of this up. He probably told you who I am, right? That I have a bright future. That a criminal record would ruin my political prospects. He flashed a smug, confident smile. Come on, Judge. We both know how this ends. You give me a slap on the wrist, maybe some community service that I'll have my assistant do for me, and we all go home. My father wouldn't let you ruin me. I picked up the piece of paper again. It was a letter faxed directly from the senator's private office that morning, following a brief phone conversation with his chief of staff. Preston was right about one thing: his father had reached out. But he was tragically, catastrophically wrong about the contents of that message. You seem very confident in your father's protection, I said, holding the paper up. Of course, Preston replied. He loves me, and he knows how to handle people like, well, people in local government. Mr. Whitmore, I said, turning to his attorney, have you seen this document? The lawyer looked nervous now, sweat beading on his forehead. I was aware there was a communication, Your Honor, but I wasn't privy to the specific contents. You assumed it was a request for leniency. I finished for him. Standard procedure, Your Honor, Whitmore muttered. There is nothing standard about this case, I said. Mr. Sterling, you asked me to check my phone. You asked me to listen to your father. Well, I have, and I think it's time you heard exactly what Senator Sterling has to say about your behavior. Preston leaned forward, looking triumphant. He even winked at the gallery. He thought he had one. He thought the game was rigged in his favor. He had no idea the floor was about to give way beneath him. Read it, Preston challenged. Read it out loud so everyone knows who really runs this city. As you wish, I said. I put on my reading glasses, the paper trembling slightly in my hand, not from nerves, but from the weight of what I was about to deliver. This is on the official letterhead of the United States Senate, I began. Dated today, addressed to Judge Frank Caprio, Providence Municipal Court, regarding the case of Preston Sterling. I paused, peering over the rim of my glasses at him. Are you ready, Mr. Sterling? Born ready? He smirked. I began to read. Dear Judge Caprio, I said aloud, my voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. I have reviewed the police report and the body camera footage regarding the incident involving my son, Preston. To say I am disappointed would be a gross understatement. I am mortified. I looked up. The smirk on Preston's face faltered, his brows knitting in confusion. I continued. I have spent 40 years in public service building a reputation grounded in integrity and respect for the common man. My son appears to labor under the delusion that my position grants him the right to abuse hard-working citizens and bypass the law. He is profoundly wrong. A murmur spread through the gallery. I am writing to make one thing crystal clear to this court. I read on. I am requesting that you show my son absolutely no leniency. A collective gasp filled the room. Preston jumped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. What? That's not real? You're lying. Sit down, I ordered, never taking my eyes off the page. I am not finished. Do not consider my office. Do not consider my name. If he threatened Mrs. Rodriguez, punish him. If he threatened your court using my influence, punish him doubly. He needs to learn that in this country, the law applies to everyone, perhaps even more so to those born with privilege. The room was frozen. Please treat him exactly as you would any other citizen who committed these shameful acts. Perhaps facing real consequences for the first time in his life will teach him the humility I evidently failed to instill at home. Sincerely, Senator Robert Sterling. I lowered the paper. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, the kind that follows the shattering of an illusion. Preston's face drained of color. He looked like a child who had just learned Santa Claus wasn't real. He turned frantically to his attorney. Whitmore, do something. That's fake. That old man wouldn't do this to me. He needs me. I'm his legacy. Charles Whitmore looked pale. He pulled a BlackBerry from his pocket, read a message, then closed his eyes. Mr. Sterling, he said quietly, I just received confirmation from the senator's chief of staff. It's authentic. He's cutting you loose on this one. No? Preston shouted, his voice cracking. He can't. I'll call the press. I'll tell them. I'll tell them? You'll tell them what, Mr. Sterling? I asked calmly. That your father refused to obstruct justice. That he refused to be an accomplice to your arrogance. Your father just demonstrated more integrity in his little finger than you have shown in your entire body. He didn't call to save you. He called to make sure I didn't hold back. Preston collapsed back into his chair, breathing hard. The arrogance was gone, replaced by raw, panicked desperation. His eyes darted to the exit, then back to me, okay, and finally to Mrs. Maria. For the first time, real, tangible fear crept into his eyes. The shield of the Sterling name had not merely cracked, it had evaporated. Now, I said, placing the letter into the case file, the playing field is level. It is just you, the law, and the woman you humiliated. Your father has stepped aside. So let us return to my earlier questions, the one you laughed at. You offered to write a check. You asked how much the fine was. I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto his. You tried to turn this courtroom into a marketplace. You thought you could buy Mrs. Maria's dignity for $500. You thought you could buy my integrity with a lunch appointment. You are about to learn that the currency we deal in here is not dollars. It is accountability. I can pay more, Preston stammered, his voice trembling. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I was stressed. I'll pay her $10,000, $20,000. Just don't put this on my record, please. My life, my reputation, your reputation. I scoffed. You built your reputation on that video where you spat at a woman's feet. That is who you are. And now you want to pay $20,000. You are doing it again. You are trying to bribe your way out of a character flaw. I turned to the bailiff. Officer, please stand by Mr. Sterling. I have a feeling he may not like what comes next. The bailiff, a large man with arms crossed, stepped directly behind Preston's chair. Preston flinched. Mr. Whitmore, I said, addressing his attorney. Do you have any defense for your client's actions other than that he was in a hurry and his father is important? Because both defenses have just been dismantled. Whitmore stood slowly. He knew it was over. Your Honor, my client asks for mercy. He is young. He is clearly misguided. We ask for probation. Probation, I repeated. Probation is for people who make mistakes. What I saw in that video was not a mistake. It was a mindset, a worldview that says, I matter, and you don't. And that mindset is dangerous. I looked directly at Preston. Stand up, Mr. Sterling. It is time for sentencing. He rose to his feet. His knees shook so violently that the fabric of his expensive trousers trembled. He was no longer a lion. He was a frightened mouse. Preston Sterling, I said, my voice ringing through the courtroom. For the charge of illegal parking, guilty. For the charge of verbal assault, guilty. For the charge of destruction of property, guilty. But there is another charge you added yourself today in this courtroom. Preston's eyes widened. What? I didn't do anything. Contempt, I said, and attempted bribery. You offered me money. You offered Mrs. Maria money to silence her. You tried to turn justice into a transaction, and for that, I am going to teach you a lesson your father evidently could not. I picked up my pen. The scratching sound as I wrote on the docket was the only noise in the room. Sentence you to the maximum fines on all counts, I said. But you are wealthy. Fines mean nothing to you. A $5,000 fine is a lunch bill. It stings your wallet, but not your ego, and it is your ego that requires correction. I looked up. So, in addition to the fines, I sentence you to 30 days. Preston exhaled in relief. 30 days suspended. Probation. No, I said coldly. 30 days in the county jail. Immediate intake. No bail. Preston screamed. Jail. You can't put me in jail. I'm a Sterling. And, I continued, raising my voice over his protests, I am ordering 200 hours of community service, not clerical work in an air-conditioned office. I pointed toward Mrs. Maria. You disrespected the people who keep our streets clean. You will work beside them. He was wearing worn jeans, scuffed work boots, and a simple gray t-shirt. He looked ordinary. He looked like a man who had done a day's labor. Mr. Sterling, I said from the bench, you are not on today's docket. Are you in trouble again? No, Your Honor, he replied. His voice was different, deeper, steadier, stripped of that frantic arrogance. I finished my community service yesterday, my 200th hour. I wanted to come by. I wanted to show you something. He reached into his pocket. The bailiff tensed, hand moving toward his belt, remembering the last time Preston had reached for something. But Preston pulled out a crumpled, dirty piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully and placed it on the bench. It was a photograph, a selfie. In it, Preston wore a neon yellow safety vest, holding a trash bag. Standing beside Mrs. Maria, both of them were smiling. I went to find her, Preston said quietly. On my first day out of jail, I didn't just mail the check, Judge. I went to her station. I apologized. It's not because you told me to, but because of what happened in jail. I leaned forward. Tell me. It's my first night in county. Preston began, looking down at his hands that were now calloused. I was terrified. I thought I was better than everyone, but nobody cared who my father was. I was just inmate number 492. I was scared. And you know who helped me? A guy named Marcus. He was in for unpaid parking tickets because he couldn't afford them. He shared his food with me. He listened to me cry. Preston looked up, his eyes clear. Marcus cleans floors for a living. Before that day, I wouldn't have looked at him twice. I would have stepped over him. But in there, he was the only person who treated me like a human being. It made me realize you were right. Value isn't what's in your bank account. It's character and the sanitation work. I asked, the hardest thing I've ever done. He laughed. a genuine, self-deprecating laugh. People looked right through me, Judge. I was wearing that neon vest, standing on the curb, and people I used to party with walked right past me like I was invisible. They threw coffee cups at my feet. It hurt, but it taught me how Mrs. Maria felt when I threw those keys. You will report to the Department of Public Works, I declared, my voice cutting through his protest like a knife. Specifically, the downtown sanitation crew. You will spend 200 hours picking up trash, scrubbing graffiti, and sweeping the very gutters you threw your keys into. And you will do it wearing a neon safety vest, not an Italian suit. You will learn what it feels like to be invisible to people like you. You will learn what it feels like to clean up other people's messes. Preston's jaw dropped. You want me to be a garbage man? I'm a Sterling. I have a master's degree. This is humiliating. It's cruel and unusual punishment. Mrs. Maria does not find her job humiliating, I shot back. She finds it honorable. She feeds her family with it. The fact that you find honest labor cruel is exactly why you need to do it. You are not better than the people who keep this city running, Mr. Sterling. In fact, until you learn respect, you are worth far less to this community than they are. Preston turned to his lawyer, grabbing his arm. Charles, stop this. Appeal. Do something. I can't go to jail. I can't sweep streets. I have a gala next week. People will see me. Charles Whitmore gently peeled Preston's fingers off his sleeve. He closed his briefcase with a definitive snap. Preston, the senator, was clear. No appeals. You take the punishment. My hands are tied. He looked at me, then back at his client. Actually, I think he's right. You need this. You're fired. Preston screamed, his face turning a blotchy red. You're all fired. I'll sue the city. I'll sue the court. I'll buy this building and turn it into a parking lot. Ain't you're done buying things? I said. Bailiff, take Mr. Sterling into custody. 30 days county jail. Remand him immediately. The bailiff stepped forward, unhooking the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clink was the loudest sound in the room. Preston backed away, knocking over his expensive leather chair. It crashed to the floor, a symbol of his collapsing world. No, touch me, Preston shouted, backing into the corner of the defense area. You don't understand. I have claustrophobia. I have anxiety. I need my meds. You can't put me in a cage with criminals. The only criminal I see right now is the man who assaulted a civil servant and tried to bribe a judge, I said. Officer, do your duty. 2 more officers stepped in to assist. They weren't rough, but they were firm. They grabbed Preston's arms. For a second, he tried to pull away, his $5,000 blazer bunching up as he struggled. But reality has a weight that no amount of entitlement can lift. They spun him around. Click, click. Preston Sterling, the golden boy of Washington, was in cuffs. He looked down at his wrists, at the cold steel pressing against his skin right next to his Patek Philippe watch. The contrast was striking. Time had finally run out. He looked up at me, and for the first time there was no anger, just shock. Pure, unadulterated shock. He was crying now. Not the fake tears of a manipulator, but the terrified tears of a boy who realizes the lights are going out. Judge, please, he sobbed, his voice breaking. I'm scared. I don't belong there. Please, I'll apologize. Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Tell him to stop. I looked at Mrs. Maria. She was standing now. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look vengeful. She looked sad. She walked a few steps closer to the railing. Double quotes. Mr. Preston, she said softly. The room went quiet to hear her. I don't want you to be scared. I don't want you to suffer. I just want you to see me. When you're out there sweeping the streets, look at the people you pass. Look at their eyes. We are all just trying to live, just like you. Preston hung his head, sobbing uncontrollably. Take him away, I ordered. quietly as they marched him out the side door toward the holding cells. His sobs echoed off the walls. My father called my father. But his father had already made the call that mattered. The door slammed shut. The heavy, metallic thud signaled the end of the Preston Sterling show. I sat back in my chair, exhaling a long breath. The energy in the courtroom had shifted. It wasn't tense anymore. It felt lighter, cleansed. I looked out at the gallery. People were nodding. Some were wiping their eyes. They had just witnessed something rare, a moment where the scales of justice actually balanced. Where money didn't tip the scale. Where the little guy didn't get crushed by the giant. I turned to Mrs. Maria. She was wiping her face with a tissue, but she was standing taller than she had when she walked in. Mrs. Rodriguez, I said, I want to thank you. She looked surprised. Thank me, Your Honor. For what? For standing your ground, I said. It is not easy to stand up to power. It is not easy to do your job when people are screaming at you. But because you wrote that ticket, because you refused to be bullied, you reminded everyone in this room what integrity looks like. You reminded us that dignity isn't something you buy. It's something you carry. I picked up the file again. Regarding the restitution, Mr. Sterling offered you $20,000 to stay quiet. That was a bribe. But the law allows for victims of assault to be compensated for their distress. I looked at the lawyer, Mr. Whitmore, who was packing his bag and looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Mr. Whitmore, I said, the fines I imposed are maximum, but I am also ordering a civil restitution for emotional distress and punitive damages. Given the severity of the public humiliation and the assault, I paused, doing the math in my head. I am ordering Mr. Sterling to pay Mrs. Rodriguez the sum of $10,000, not as hush money, not as a bribe, but as a penalty for his arrogance. And Mr. Whitmore, I want that check on my desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Or I will extend Mr. Sterling's stay in my hotel by another week. Is that clear? Whitmore nodded vigorously. Crystal clear, Your Honor. It will be here, Mrs. Maria gasped. $1 million, Your Honor. That's half a year's salary for me. Then take a vacation, Mrs. Maria. I smiled for the first time that morning. Go somewhere where nobody yells at you. You earned it, she smiled back, a genuine, warm smile that lit up her face. Thank you, Judge. Thank you. But the story didn't end there. You might think that jail would break a man like Preston Sterling or make him bitter. You might think he would come out hating the system. But sometimes, when you strip away the ego, the money, and the false pride, you find the human being underneath. 6 months later, on a snowy Wednesday morning, my clerk handed me a note. There's someone here to see you, Judge, she said. He's not on the docket. He says he just wants 2 minutes. Who is it? I asked. It's Preston Sterling, she said. And you're not going to believe what he's wearing. I told the bailiff to let him in. The doors opened, and Preston Sterling walked in. But if I hadn't seen his face, I wouldn't have recognized him. Gone was the $5,000 Italian suit. Gone was the Patek Philippe watch. Gone was the sneer of entitlement. He took a deep breath. My father and I were talking again. He told me he was proud of me for the first time in years. Not because I closed a deal or met a president, but because I finished my service without complaining. Mr. Sterling, I said, a smile finally breaking across my face, when you walked in here 6 months ago. I saw a boy playing dress-up in a man's suit. Today, I see a man in work clothes. You have learned the lesson that some people spend a lifetime missing. Dignity is not a birthright. It is earned. Thank you, Judge, Preston said, extending his hand. Thank you for not taking my money. Thank you for sending me to jail. It saved my life. I shook his hand. It was a firm, honest handshake. Good luck, Preston. Stay out of my courtroom. I plan to, Your Honor, unless it's to visit. He turned and walked out. He didn't strut. He walked with purpose. I turned to the camera, addressing the millions of people who had followed this saga. You've just witnessed a transformation. We live in a world that often tells us money is the ultimate scorecard. We are told that if you are rich, you are important, and if you are poor, you are invisible. But in this courtroom, we strip all of that away. Preston Sterling came in here thinking he could buy justice. He thought the rules didn't apply to him. He was arrogant, cruel, and entitled. It would have been easy to take his fine money and look the other way. It would have been easy to let his father's name sway me. But justice isn't about what is easy. It is about what is right. We sent a message that day. No one is above the law, not the senator's son, not the billionaire, not the celebrity. And because we held the line, because we enforced consequences, a young man was forced to look in the mirror and change. Mrs. Maria got her dignity back. Preston got his humanity back. And the system worked exactly as it should. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this: treat the janitor with the same respect as the CEO. Because, in the end, we are all just people trying to make our way through this world. And no amount of money can buy the peace that comes from a clear conscience. I'm Judge Frank Caprio. Until next time, be kind to one another.